And we're live. All right. Great. So today we have Samar Sikka, who's here with us, who's a Harvard grad, and he's a very accomplished individual. We're quite excited to have him on this and just share experience going through the very rigorous MBA process, but also just being able to shed light on what got him there and what he's doing currently to act as a source of inspiration for all our students and aspirants for all of the top competitive MBA programs. Summer, just firstly, thank you so much for doing this. And I would love for you to start with and share a little bit about your journey and what you're doing right now.
Thanks, Ananya. Thanks for having me and to all of your colleagues and team at Unit Discovery. I'm not so sure of being very deserving of your very kind words, but I was, looking at Ananya's profile, and I figured that I was wondering actually as to why does she need me and others to come and inspire all of your students. You have a pretty envious resume and profile yourself. But no, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. And just before I start, I very quickly, I know we have only half an hour, but if you need me for longer, I'm here. Any questions you need to answer, if you or any of your students need to go one-on-one, I'm happy to do that as well. The quick background about me. I graduated HPS in 2022. My experience has been across a variety of sectors. I began my career in banking and finance. I went into filmmaking and media and entertainment, ran a startup, went back into finance, structured finance specifically. And after graduating in 2022, I'm now in the AI infrastructure and defense tech and AI space. So that's what I do. I have to go back a long time to think about what. So I'll start on any if that's okay with the HBase application process. Is that where would you would like me to start, or is there something else you'd want me to begin with?
Question. No, that's absolutely the next question I wanted to ask as well. Apart from obviously what you're doing right now, and now that we look back at your journey before HPS started, what were those, say, two, three top things that you were doing on your profile that you think helped you get to HPS or crack HPS?
Hmm. Yeah, mine is a bit of a peculiar case. So I got in 2016, which is when I did my first year. And I took a sabbatical after that to work on a startup of mine and went back in 21. Um, Prior to that, like I said, I've had a bit of a diverse career. So I began in banking and finance, and then got into filmmaking. And I I personally felt that out of the many applications that a school like Harvard or any other Ivy League school gets, which is your typical consulting, PE, finance for a few years post a top undergrad. The fact that I had experimented with my career worked in my favor. Um, it's I can assure you that's not what I at the time when I was very young I was looking to do. But I would imagine that there are not many sort of unique applications per se. Like filmmakers, for instance, who pursue a business degree at Harvard go to. So I think it was easy to sort of not bucket my applications along with the thousands of others that they get with a very traditional path. I have generally, outside of that, I have thought about this many a times when people have come to me for advice, and my sense is that there is and which I would advise to anybody, not just for their MBA applications, but for life in general, I think is satiating and satiating your intellectual curiosity, having it to begin with, and then satiating it by taking some initiative. And the fact that I experimented with my career without sort of fear of failure per se in many different spaces, which gave me sort of a sniff of entrepreneurship very early on, was something I would imagine that worked in my favor. It was easy to judge my application in I on its own as opposed to say compared to a class or a cohort of applications that sort of sounded similar. So a bit of it was planned, a bit of it was just sort of instinctual in terms of just trying out new things in life, and that's something that I think I'd sort of recommend to anybody. I think the this is how I think about it. So the many people in India have this, especially in India, have this misconception that if I'm able to, I don't know, score a 750, 760 on my GMAT, I'll automatically get into, say, HPS or an Ivy League. And I would encourage those people to think of your application as a package of your recommendations, your work experience, your story in life, what theme you're following, what your future plans are. The MBA is only 1 or 2 years, depending on where you go. And I'd sort of encourage you to think about like life like that in general, that you're not, your entire life is not based just, is not just for that 1 or 2 years that you spend your MBA. So just generally, being curious, and I know you are a sports person, a musician, you run your own ventures, you've worked around the world. So I'm sure there's sort of a curiosity there that you have been following and taking initiative on, right? And so it's not that you did it for your masters and after it was done, you were back to your old self. So I would sort of draw that analogy between how you want to build your life and personality, and let that seep into your MBA application as opposed to the other way around.
That makes a lot of sense. In fact, that's a really good insight into what a lot of students can look into. How long back would you say you started to think about this? I mean, do you take like a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3, that you dedicated directly to your application and then you started working backwards? Or was it sort of like more on the whim where just 6 months back and then everything kind of fell into place? The GMAT score and then the SOPs and then the entire narrative that you brought together? Because the reason I ask this is timelines are so crucial, and a lot of people are working professionals, are working full time, they're running their own businesses, and it becomes the hardest part to navigate. So, how do they think about timelines generally?
Um, I would. So I think HBS has just HBS specifically. I don't know other schools, and I don't know now. Like I said, my application was a long time back. So I think they've eliminated round three applications, if I'm not mistaken. They only do round one and round two. Um, you know, I have seen, at the time I was doing my applications, because I was in the filmmaking space, I was also interested in studying filmmaking. I was also doing film school applications, and I was obviously very busy with the release of a film. And I've seen people who are busier than me ace their GMATs and do their applications. So, I don't want to diminish how hard it is to do an application by they saying that, oh, everybody has time, but it is sort of possible to do it. All I would say is sort of, try not to leave things to the last minute. So a lot of round three applicants back in the day would get this advice is try and get into round two. Round three should be for those exceptional circumstances where you have things going on in life and you can't do one of the earlier rounds. Some my experience was somewhere in between. I didn't plan it too far in advance. After my undergrad, my dream was to sort of do HPS, but my middle years were all sort of filmmaking. So I was like, oh, now I need to go study filmmaking, and uh, it was not on a whim, but it was also not super well planned. It was somewhere in between, but I got things done in time. I was not submitting applications a few minutes before its deadline. It was well done in advance, and everything was my essays, my recommendations, everything was sort of thoroughly checked and made sure that it had my voice to it. Because today you, for instance, have chat GPTs and all these sort of AI writers of the world. Back in the day, or even now, like, consultants used to would write, and a lot of, I sort of did my application by myself. I didn't use any consultant, anyone's help, but uh, that's important, that if there's a lot of eyes looking at your application, you're taking a lot of advice. At the end of the day, you want to leave time for ensuring that the application has your voice. These are admissions counselors with decades of experience. They'll read a line and know whether it's been written by you or not, whether it's authentic or not. And you want to ensure that all, I don't want to say never, but that rarely ever happens if you are racing the clock.
That makes a lot of sense as well. I actually was looking at the questions while you were speaking and shedding light on just the entire authenticity aspect as well. What's one thing that you think people have people overrate and people underrate. I think you already shed light on just being able to overemphasize on the GMAT score. But is there like that one mistake that people make on the application or their essays that you've noticed in maybe your cohort or your juniors that might have seeked advice from you?
Yeah. I think there are a couple of them, and I'm happy to, it would be, um, it would not, it would be incorrect to like state one, that people have go through different application experiences. And so I think one is that overemphasizing any one bit, and saying, oh, that my essay is most important. The other is like storyline or my recommendation. It's all a package. The moment that file goes to an admissions counselor, they look at the entire package and they're sort of draw things from that. So I think overemphasizing any one bit, which can be different for different people based on what are their strengths or weaknesses. I think the second is, uh, this is something we are actually taught in filmmaking and even in debating a little bit when we're taught debating is also the most personal is the most universal. And so having that voice and authenticity is, and I'm coming back to this because the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes we try to find language, or we write things or we say things because we feel that this is what the other person wants to hear. Now there is sort of a fine line there. Obviously you don't want to come off as incompetent or unprofessional, and you don't want to use language like that, but you also don't want to uh, you know have a mindset where your entire application is structured in a way where you're like, this is what I think the admissions counselor or HPS wants to hear. I think it's very important to have to sort of have your own voice, to make sure that whatever your strengths are, that's coming across, that you can be able to communicate that well. And I think that's a bit of an underemphasized and underrated part of a lot of these applications sometimes. You're trying to find words, and sometimes they tend to be very generic. So like for instance, let's say somebody very interested in the healthcare space, and they're like, oh, the HBS is this massive, prestigious brand that I want to get into. So let me state an overly ambitious goal, which is I want to solve global healthcare. Now, it's good to be ambitious, but in something like that, where sure, you're passionate about healthcare, you've done a lot of things in it, specificity helps. So it you know you would imagine that HBS is, because of the size and scale of and the brand name, they're looking for these very ambitious people and might help my cause to mention these ambitious goals. And it's not wrong, but yeah, it's a very specific example of um, trying to state what you think is the best for you, uh, in that app, for you and your story in that application, as opposed to what somebody else wants you to say or wants to hear.
For sure. That's something that we also advise a lot of our students is to be as specific but as also as authentic as possible. And just to piggyback off of that, there's been times where a lot of students come with a certain trajectory. I think in your case, you've had a very unique background going into HPS. And as you mentioned, it's also worked in your favor. But there's often an over supply of certain sort of sector of students, whether typically Indian techies coming from, having a typical IIT IIM graduation track and then applying to, and the same goes for a lot of people from the Chinese community. So a lot of like these oversupplies, how do you think they could tackle their application and be specific with respect to not just where they come from, because they've had such specific typical tracks of going into from tech to consulting, and then even then when they want to state their goals, they're all very similar sounding. Do you have any advice for those type of applicants?
Back in the day, I would have said something like, excellence in one dimension is better than, say, competence in 10. But where I started, and I'm probably not the best for this advice, but I'll give it my best shot. I think that um, if you are interested in certain things that just happen to be what there is an oversupply of in these applications, it doesn't mean that you should move away from your stated goal. You don't want to be different just for the sake of it, but you want to make sure that there are certain aspects of your personality that are coming across. Let's pick a cohort, right? If you know when you end when you go to one of these schools, a large part of the cohort is that it's PE consulting. It's sort of these very specific tracks, and you'll see that there are similarities in a lot of that cohort, and they are probably the top percentile of of that entire cohort applying. Now, that's not to say that they shouldn't have done it. They should have taken a completely different path, or somebody who didn't get in who were probably as competent as them. It is a very competitive process. Should have chosen something else. I would say that it probably all comes down to communication. So there's certain things that you're trying to communicate through your application. Yeah, which is the awards you won, like what all have you pursued in life, your career. How do you communicate all of these things? How does your personality come across on paper? Because that's how an admissions counselor is looking, is very important. So I would overemphasize the fact that you, um, you know, you want to be able to show curiosity. You want to be able to pursuing. You want to be able to pursue different things in life, and taking initiative for it, and being specific about what the impact has been. Right. So your resume should not really read like a marketing brochure that I worked at these big name consulting firms or tech companies, and I went to a great undergrad school, which in its own regard is a descriptor of performance. These places are already very competitive and it's hard to get into. But what is the impact that you're able to have? And so I think that communication is sometimes very important. Anton Chekhov was a Russian playwright. I used to take writing coaching back in the day, and my coach told me that Anton Chekhov had this line. He said that if he was a playwright, and he said that if there is a gun on the wall at the beginning of a play, make sure it goes off by the end of the play, right? So every line, every comma, every period uh, has to serve some purpose in communicating who you are. So at the end of, say, reading your application, you don't want an admissions offer to counterintuitive. You don't want an admissions offer to say that, oh, this person's extraordinary. You want them to really say, oh, I want to meet this person. I want to know their life story. I want this person in my class. And you don't, in debating, we are taught if you are debating somebody, you should know their side better than they know their own if you want to be a good debater. And I'm not saying step into the shoes of an admissions counselor, but like go if we are all readers, right? Like there are certain books that are more memorable than others. There's certain emails that sometimes people write to you or you write that you put in a lot of effort and they're more memorable than others, right? So I think that aspect sort of has to come across. Don't veer away from uh, doing what you're doing just because the entire world's doing it. Just try and make sure that you're in the top percentile or two and you're able to communicate that at the end of the day. I'm sorry, that was
That's
too
good.
generic. It sounds
No,
like
no, no,
sorry.
no.
So
I think the quote just sort of put the cherry on cake and brought it all together. That was really nice. That I'm going to remember that next time I'm giving advice to anyone. That really put things into perspective. Um, just to carry forward from there, now a lot of, especially Indian students, and not to, obviously, I think with the backgrounds and sort of like the lives that they lived before applications, a lot of them aren't the best writers. And we often struggle. I'm sure they have a writer somewhere, but we often struggle as consultants getting that out of them. What do you think such individuals can do? Should they work on their writing skills? Should they just stick to what they know? How can they tackle their SOPs in the best possible manner to be more authentic and bring out the best part of their story? Also, another question, in fact, that somebody brought up in the comments box is, what kind of vocabulary should they be using? It's quite, it's a basic question, but I think it's very important as well.
yeah, that's very interesting. I think that uh, the first thought that would probably come to mind is that there is no shortcut to doing the things you have to do. And probably that's one of the things that these schools are looking for as well, right? Like, are you willing to do what needs to be done? And so, like, if you're not a reader, making sure that you have like the HBS mode of uh, education and imparting their curriculum is the case study method. So if you're not a reader, you will not do well there if you're able to get in when you go there. So I think developing some of these, like I was not good at writing, and so there's only so much practice will teach you. Like coaching some of these skills, um, so becomes necessary at some point in life. And uh, there is, was that your question that people who are not readers or don't naturally have some of these skills and how can
Precisely. Yeah.
they
Yeah.
persist? I have found that over time I have taken coaching in many things that would, including communication coaching, that I have found have been very fruitful for me. That many people, especially in India, would be like, "Oh, why are you doing this?" You know, just like it's not needed. Just focus on your
It's
work.
so
Things like
funny you
speaking
mentioned that.
coaching. Yeah,
Sorry, I'm
yeah,
interjecting, but just on
yeah,
that part, there's actually somebody today, and she's the mom of a ninth grader, literally that approached us for like communication coaching. Is there anybody that
yeah,
teaches communication at your end? So I think it's obviously now something people are looking at, but just to add to your point, it's probably
yeah.
was overlooked many years ago.
You know, it still is. And I remember, when I was in school, I know, by the way, because I checked with a lot of schools and friends, those kids go to schools, that it's still not part of the curriculum. How to speak, body language, verbal and non-verbal communication, eye contact. I remember when I had flown to Boston for my HBS interview, and one of my mentors, also an HBS graduate, was coaching me, an American fellow, and he said that I almost never hire anybody who cannot make eye contact with me about 95% of the time if you speak. For the entire length of time, for about 90 to 95% of they don't make eye contact with me. And it's something I struggled with. Like I realized that I was looking left and right and only about 10-15% in the percent in the person's eyes. Um, and it was not something that I had given conscious thought to. So I have realized that over time, you know, being okay with being a student way past your education is sort of what helps, and being okay with that regardless of what your peers think. Not very long ago, I come from the media and filmmaking sort of space, that background, but not long ago, I took some lessons in storytelling as well, because I feel like that's a really important part of, like, you learn things here and there through work and through being in an incredible environment like HBS, but nothing like structured coaching for anything you want to achieve in life. I learned something very interesting uh, when I was in school, which was that we take tuitions, right? I suppose kids still do, and they would co- parents would often um, enroll their kids in tuitions where they were weak. But if you went to pursue a sport, you automatically went to a sport that you were strong in. If you're a basketball and tennis player, right? So sort of drawing that distinction as to, you also want to coach yourself in something that you automatically feel is your strength. You should not only do it because you're pursuing a sport professionally. It should apply to, if I'm in the top decile of storytelling, I want to make sure in life generally for my own success, I want to be in the top percentile. If I want to, I don't want to hit a ceiling or plateau at any point. So I think that thought process, that I want to coach in a space that I'm naturally good at, as opposed to what's a weakness.
That is so well said. I wish I could just invite and open this up to the undergrad community as well. And I think a lot of parents and students that are in high school would gain so much from this session. But luckily, we're recording this, so we'll share it with them later because that's such profound advice. We also tell a lot of our students to work on their strengths more than just focusing on their weaknesses. And so I think that just goes back to a point. But thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that. One of the debates that's obviously happening now is about whether an MBA is fruitful or not. What is your take on that as of 2026?
See, I feel that this debate has been going on for the last decade or so, the last 15 years or so. I think that it's a little more amplified now, but even when I had gotten in and in my middle years and when I graduated, this is a bit of an ongoing debate that's now amplified because of the sort of ecosystem we are in. You know, you would find that long after you graduate, sometimes we pick up a lot of um, tangibles to justify to debate the pros and cons of an MBA education. So, is the coursework relevant? Is what you're teaching? And all of those are fair questions to ask and debate. And sometimes even a student's posed to the university, like, do I need to really study or spend my time when I'm spending so much money on all of these things? And that's fair. But there are certain intangibles. There is a je ne sais quoi to going to um, a a place of discomfort, I want to say, where you're not at home, you're not in a country where you sort of know how it functions, and you have to fend for yourself. Um, you have to try and match up to sort of the mental bandwidth and the intellectual capability that exists in the class, and sort of prove your worth in a way. And that's an intangible that holds you in good stead for the rest of your life. There are certain, like, I graduated 4 years ago. I did my first year 10 years ago. There are cases that I still remember. So there is obviously that tangible bit as well, that there's something that's so mind blowing. And there are classes and courses and cases and professors that are just extraordinary, that it stays with you for life. But that's still a small percentage of everything that you experience that you can't put a finger on. What being in a class with 90 kids from around the world who have had different experiences, what impact that has on you over a year or 2 years. What sort of sometimes struggling for an internship or a job, or having some of these Socratic debates, what it does to just expanding your mind. That's not a tangible that you can put a value on. And so I would say that you know, it shouldn't be just for an MBA, but just for, and this is something you and I have spoken about. I'm very passionate about the fact that, education at the highest levels in the most diverse and uncomfortable of environments is very, very important.
No, I think you've summed it up really well. I will be mindful of your time, but just one last question before I let you leave, which is just parting advice that you'd like to share. You've already shared so many words of wisdom with all the students that have been watching and will watch this after as well. Uh, what's that one piece of advice you want to share with MBA aspirants from India?
Yeah, I would say that, and this is something I lacked, and I have worked to improve on. I think your competitive advantage is your self-awareness and honesty towards that self-awareness. And we can sometimes hide that, especially now, because uh, you have a large language model giving you answers and writing things for you, and so that can sometimes kill it. Like that, defensibility is at a premium right now. How you can write, and how you can sort of critical thinking, these all of these things are at a premium. But I think being honest with yourself about what your strengths and skills are, um, how you can present them, and making sure that um, you're sort of communicating that well in your application, I think is very, very important. And I think to sum that up, I would say that um, a lot of your students listening to this would have, I would imagine, access to apply to schools, right? And they're already at an advantage over there, having the knowledge of applying, having access to financial aid and consultants like yourself, and uh, knowing what to write and how to present yourself. So you already have an edge there, sort of having the confidence to finally go ahead and making sure that and applying and making sure that yours is a story that needs to be told. That the world is a book, by the way. Let me end with a book recommendation, which is, I think, the earlier people read it in life, the better. It's a book called Show Your Work, by Austin Kleon, and it basically talks about you, you know you uh, You don't want to be, if you're doing work in isolation and nobody knows about it, it's sort of not worth it, right? Like how will the world discover you or your work? You have to put it out there in some way. And this book encourages you to sort of do that. So I think just sort of reading this and making sure that you tell your story in the most unique way, that you're able to show initiative, show potential. A place like HBS or any Ivy League is not looking for your past. They basically, why does HBS hire 900, sorry, take in 900, 950 kids every year? They're hoping that a small percentage of that is successful 20 to 30 to 40 years from now. Um, Very interestingly, if we have a minute or so, HBS looked at its class of 2009, and they saw that 1% of the class of, and this is, by the way, in the middle of a debate where a lot of these white collar frauds were coming out, right? A lot of these happened to be HBS grads, and there was a book that came out, I think it was called The Golden Passport, that was dissing the HBS MBA. Amidst all of this, HBS saw that its class of 2009, 1% of that class had IPO'd. And if you thought about, if you thought about starting a venture back in the day, you're like, what is a school that I should go to? They would be like, oh, go to Stanford because it's, in Silicon Valley, and you have and that's all of that is true. But, my sense is how we realize that, oh, we are not really pushing this stat out there as much. And so you now have an engineering school 100 meters down from the HBS campus. You have an innovation lab, iLab there, which promotes a lot of entrepreneurship. Um, and I think sort of uh, realizing that, I think it's important to realize obviously what your successes and experience story has been, but making sure you communicate to a school like HBS or any other school for that matter, that you're on your way to becoming exceedingly successful a few years, if not decades from now, and that's what they're betting on.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm going to leave it at that. But thank you so much. It brings us to the end of the panel. I really appreciate all the insights you've been able to share, and I know for a fact that this will be extremely useful for all the students that'll go on and watch this from now onwards. So really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me. And I think the next panel should be you advising people with your experience.
That's really kind of you. That's sweet. I'll talk to you offline. Thank you so much. Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye.
Bye.